Good morning, everyone. My name is Allison DeGuide. I'm with the Illinois Restaurant Association. I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar on preventing and treating burns, essential safety practices you need to know. Today's webinar is being broadcast in English, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. To listen in Spanish or Chinese, please use the interpretation button in your toolbar. This webinar is being presented by the Illinois Restaurant Association in partnership with the Cook County Small Business Source. Established to ensure businesses emerge from COVID-19 intact and positioned for growth, the Small Business Source connects small business owners with expert guidance and support. Services include no-cost business advising, resources, and events that connect small business owners with a community of advisors. For one-on-one business advising, sign up at cookcountysmallbiz.org. It's free and easy to sign up. And also, before we begin, I'd like everyone attending to know that the Illinois Restaurant Association remains a resource to you. We send regular email updates with what you need to know, and you can sign up for those on our website. For today's webinar, you can use the Q&A button to post your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Dr. Joshua Carson, the director at Loyola Medicine's Burn Center. Dr. Carson, please take it away.
Share screen. No matter how hard you try, you can't avoid being an old man at a computer when these things happen. All right, so hello, everybody. My name is Josh Carson, and I direct the burn unit at Loyola. And so the reason I'm here, first of all, you guys work with a lot of fire, so we have that in common. But much like the burn units are few and far between. We're one of 2 verified burn units in the region, and I see us as sort of a resource to the community and to the whole area, because burns have become so unusual when they're severe that there's a limited amount of people who know how to use them. So as a burn center, I wanted to sort of reach out and just sort of introduce myself to this community and let you guys know we're here to help you if there's anything we can do. And then I said I'd talk about burns, and it occurred to me, I'm used to talking to researchers and EMS techs and showing them really gory pictures that get them excited and really geeky graphs. So this was an interesting one for me to put together. My biggest takeaway lesson from this talk is not in the slides, but it's this advice. Do not Google images, funny images of people getting burned. And definitely don't YouTube that. That was something I learned in preparing for this talk. So the other thing is, like I said, I'm really here to give you whatever information I may be able to. And if there's something that you would like to ask, please feel free to bring it up. And I'm happy to address things in the middle, sort of change the stream of the conversation. So I don't know you guys personally, but I see your work. I get restaurant-based injuries are certainly a big part of what comes to us. There are different kinds of burns. We get little accidents that happens, things catch on fire, flame burns. We also get a lot of scalds, both in the workers and in patrons. And it can go all the way up to a kitchen fire. Because there's so many small restaurants out there, it'd just be nice to reach out to you guys as a group, which is I'm so happy the IRA put this together for us, in terms of sort of how we can help you manage these and maybe even prevent them. So first off, burns. Another reason you guys might be interested is this guy. I've learned more about restaurant cooking temperatures than I ever wanted to, by all the letters and requests and things I get from lawyers who are trying to sue restaurants. And I imagine you guys have heard of this, and I'm not here to take a side, but it does occur to me that these are information you might want to know about, how to avoid causing these injuries, and meeting this lovely gentleman here who is really excited to find these injuries. It is an active industry, I will be honest with you. So things I thought we could talk about, and I can go off this too, but first there's prevention. And to be honest, I don't pretend to be an expert on safe cooking, but I could certainly, and this goes for any offline conversations as well, be happy to assist anybody in discussing their prevention plans and their safety plans. First aid of the burn, I think, is I taught it to my daughter's Girl Scout troop, and I find it's actually not that well distributed, and there's some real simple things. So I'm going to give away the key message early, if you don't mind. The key message is that if somebody gets burned, put it under cool water immediately, not fevers. I'm not ice, and don't wrap it in ice or cold compresses. Cool water and keep it under cool water for a little bit of time. Okay. What you want to do is cause the burn. So I'm going to sort of throw that in there just because I want you guys to take this away, because it really is the way you could sort of, in all seriousness, prevent harm from happening. The harm actually happens starting with the start of the burn, and as the tissue is heated, the harm sort of develops over time. So with that said, back to sort of the beginning. So I'm also going to give a little bit into sort of what happens, how we treat burns in a surgical setting. Hopefully you won't ever need to know about it, but I thought it may be interesting of some. Also, the sort of one of the biggest things that I think about, that I think people on the other side of this don't really realize ahead of time, which is when we talk about burns, what I'm really thinking about is not just burns, but scarring. Okay, so when you have a person that works for you get a burn, or you get a burn, or your patients get a burn, it may heal just fine in a reasonable amount of time, but you want to optimize your care, because the scars it leaves can have significant impacts on your on that person's life as things go on. And litigation, I would think, would be something of interest to you, only because it sort of is remarkable to me how active this field is, and really all you got to do is just use common sense and know how not to sort of set up holes and traps for yourself. So I have to put some geeky medical slide in here to begin with. And so the first one I'm putting in is the skin. This is just to say you don't need to know each thing, but all these things listed here, the epidermis, the dermis, the subcute, or different parts of the skin, the epithelial cells, the hair, the glands, the nerve, proprioceptors. There's a ton of stuff in your skin. It does a ton of stuff for our body. And burn is basically damage to the skin. That's really what it comes down to. And the severity of the burn is an issue of how deep that damage goes, and obviously how wide and broad it is. So this is the goriest picture I will show. And I apologize if it's too gory, but I thought I should show at least one picture so that people understand what a modest burn looks like. So the picture on the left is a little girl with a flash burn. Looks like a sunburn. It's not, but basically it acts like a sunburn. And that's the most common thing to happen. You've all had that happen to you. You burn your thumb, it turns red, it hurts a lot. When they get more severe, and most people have had a blister or two in their life, then they start to blister, right? And that usually means you're going to have some open wounds that are not just the little damage, but actually opening up. And I will spare you the pictures of the far deeper ones, but they do change colors into white and less intense. If you have something like that little girl on the left, and most people on the right, really it can be managed 90% of the time with just some ointments and some dressings. And there's ways to do that. I mean, I would recommend, doing it under the care of a physician, particularly a burn center. But it doesn't. I guess what I'm saying is the next step is something that is for the more serious burns, but we do see, particularly with things like grease burns or some of those hotter mechanisms. So if you wonder what happens to your patient, to people that we get when you spill a tub of grease on your hand, well, if it burns all the way through the skin, we have to take the skin off. The skin will not grow back if the burn is all the way through it. That's the bummer of this talk, to be honest with you, is, and we are sort of always hoping to limit how much we have to cut away. And we are not a surgery first burn center. We will usually try to avoid surgery if we think it's at all feasible. But if a burn is deep, no matter how much you do or don't want surgery, it's not going to heal without it. So then that begins a process where we have to not just get rid of the burn, And you do have to get rid of the burn. If you leave it there, it can cause some significant problems, not to mention get in the way of healing. You got to build the person back. And this is sort of what I spend my time doing. We see a lot of small minor burns. We manage them, we follow them. And then it's the people who get the burns that are more serious, that are deeper, that we end up having to not just take care of the burn and sort of close it so they heal, but also take care of this, okay? Scarring. So that foot on the left is somebody who had a burn that they didn't do anything about, and it really wasn't that bad when they had it, and it healed. Took about a month and a half to heal. And you're seeing it about 5 years later. And I see these every couple of months. And you'd say it's crazy, how did the foot get so bad? But the reason is, this is a really slow process, scarring is. And if it happens to you, if you're the person who it happens to, and I've met a lot of times people who have experienced this, every day the change is so slow, you just don't notice it until you kind of like one day have a reality check and you can't believe that it's gotten this far and it sort of never occurred to you that this is a problem. So what you see is that scars over time tighten up. They replace our skin good enough for us to survive, and that's great, but they don't work as well as our skin. They don't stretch as well, and they tend to shrink over time, which is good if you're trying to close a hole, right? But if you have a burn over your foot, that becomes a problem. So we spend some of our time, a fair amount of it actually, not just dealing with the burns that are burned and trying to get them to heal, but then coming back to them, and patients come back mostly when they haven't gotten the proper care in the first place. Sometimes just it's inevitable, to help us to get help with dealing with this scar that's sort of changed their body. One thing that we offer here that has really changed the way we treat scars is the laser program. So about 10, 15 years ago, it became sort of realized that there's a way to make scars softer, which was a major revelation for those of us who really take time thinking about this. So a lot of problems that we usually really didn't have good answers for before are now a little bit more addressable with laser. What laser does is it treats a scar and basically changes the cells underneath, stimulates them to remodel and regrow. And what that causes, practical sense, is it makes things loosen up a little bit. Why is this so helpful? Well, here's the problem with scars. If you're a surgeon trying to fix a scar, you can either try to use ointments, and everybody does, and they're all happy to sell you an ointment, but there's a reason there's a billion of them, and they all have different names because none of them work that really do much in terms of changing the scar. The other thing that you can do is surgery, but if you do surgery, you create a new scar. So you're sort of guaranteed some level of scar, and people, will live their life, but they'll have this scar that's not terrible enough to sort of create another surgery and make a new scar to replace it, but it's tight, it bothers them, it pulls on them, and sometimes itches really bad because the scar can tug on your nerves and causes weird pain. If you're a chef and you use your hands and fingers and that scar is, say, between two of your fingers, it can start to make you a more clumsy chef. And it's just not comfortable. The lasers let us sort of take that, I guess you'd say not as serious, but still certainly serious if it's you kind of problem, and treat it. And again, a lot of our job is not just sort of treating the scar, but we try to prevent that from happening. So I guess the most obvious question I have, that I would sort of want to answer here is what to do when someone gets burned. Because this kid, as funny as he is, excuse me, but I deal with a lot of really rough stuff sometimes, so I try to find a light side of it. I feel for my patients who basically within an instant, you're not warned before you burned, and all of a sudden you need to know what to do, and most people don't, and I kind of wish they did. It's really the simple thing, and it's really simple stuff. I'm not about to tell you, top secrets or advanced surgical technique or, something you need a medical degree to understand. Very simple things can be the difference between a lifelong scar and something that goes away in a few weeks. And that's meaningful. So first thing to do, seems obvious, but I assure you it's not in the moment. It usually is not the patient themselves that puts the fire out. They are usually sort of so surprised, and they're often, sometimes they do, but they're often in shock. Sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but remember to stop and breathe and think. And the first thing you got to do is, before you try to deal with the patient, before you try to help the person's hand, stop whatever's causing it burning, right? If there is a fire, if they spill hot grease, for example, right, and that's on the floor and they're lying in it, get them out of the hot grease. And then we talk about cooling them in a little bit in a second. If there is a fire and they get burned by it and they drop the pan, don't forget where that pan is. Get that fire out, okay? Because I have seen, unfortunately, many cases in which what starts with a small burn becomes a house fire or a restaurant fire or a building structure fire. And that is a whole nother level of disaster that you guys don't want to meet me about. So simple, I'm sure all of you guys know the simple, pass, aim, squeeze and shoot and sweep with fire extinguishers. I'm sure that your kitchens are all stocked with fire extinguishers and that you sort of understand that this is the first thing you got to do when there's a burn happening, is make sure nobody else gets burned anymore and there's no more burning going on. Which leads to, I'm going to highlight it again, the number one thing I want everyone to know, right? Rinse a burn under cool water. So why am I so fixated on this? Like, seems like a silly thing. Here's how burns work. Burns are all trauma is energy. They're a transfer of energy that destroys tissue. They heat your tissue up enough to make it denature. So how badly you're burned is a function of how much energy gets transmitted to your skin, okay? That means how hot the thing is that you're touching and how long you're touching it, okay? Believe it or not, some of the burns that I treat that are very severe are from people who, for various reasons, don't have good sensation, lose consciousness, a whole bunch of reasons, are actually exposed to something like a hot shower, not that hot, not hot enough to burn you, you would think, but over a long period of time can cause tremendous damage. At the same time, guess what happens to your hand if it gets in a fire and gets burned? Guess what happens, or grease gets on it? It gets really hot and it doesn't instantly cool off, right? And every second, and there are graphs, and if I were going to do the geeky version of this chart with the graphs and sort of what threshold it is for the burning, basically there's a threshold where if you stay this hot this long, you will get burned in a way that needs a graft. And all the time people come to me and they ask, was this hot enough to cause this burn? Is this the fault of the restaurant or somebody else? And the truth is, it's not just how hot it was, well, what did they do when the burn happened? Did they stop and put the arm underwater? The picture I have here is very simple, nothing complicated, but I chose it purposely because if you look at that hand is all burned, right? So when I say put it underwater, I don't just mean a little tiny dinky burn. It's safe to put a burn underwater, unless your entire burn, half of your body is burned, in which case this is a moot point. But if you have a big nasty looking burn, that's still appropriate to put in water because it is still burning until it cools off, okay? And that does not happen right away. So stop the burning first, foremost, and last. The next thing to do is to cover it and to keep clean, okay? I am always amazed by the creativity that I see in people treating their burns with something that their grandmother's aunt showed them. I have seen egg whites, egg yolks, toothpaste, glue, oatmeal, honey, shampoo, soap, and a few other things that people have covered their burn in because they thought that would be a way to make it better. And none of these things do. All you really need to do is keep it clean, a little bacitracin if it's a small little burn. But you know, when it becomes a question, and what people will often sort of have difficulty is, what do I do? I have this burned hand. How do I go to the hospital? And that becomes sort of an understandable sort of question. You can wrap it in a towel. You can wrap it in a sheet. Just keep it clean, keep it covered. That also helps the patient because it hurts when the air blows on it. So that kind of helps sort of give them some help against that. But you want to take, you know, what's burned, make it not burning, and then protect it with something calm, cool, and clean. And then, you know, this is sort of the obvious / not obvious, which is to get care when needed. So all of those, well, I see there's a question about burn creams. I'll get to them in a second. But all of those pictures I showed you of scars, you know, you want to not get to that state. You want to do everything you can to optimize the healing of this burn so it doesn't scar for you. So someone asked me a question, which I always get around these, which is like, you know, what should we have in the first aid kit? You know, what ointments and creams can I use? The answer is anything that is like a sterilely produced dressing or ointment is perfectly appropriate as a temporary covering, right? If you're going to try to make the decision, you're going to treat this burn over time, and it's more than a few centimeters, that's probably a conversation to have with a physician on a case-by-case basis. But if you're talking about what do I do for first aid, the gel-infused gauzes are great. You don't need those specifically. You could also just use some bacitracin, which you get over the counter, right? Or some Vaseline and some gauze. Why the ointment? Why the gel, the ointment, and not water? Well, the advantage of that is that it actually sort of holds in place and kind of covers it, so it feels a little soothing to people, but it doesn't specifically sort of improve the outcome or like make the burn heal faster. It's just the keeping it sort of covered and protected that keeps it from getting worsened over time. So if you do have a first aid kit, which I highly recommend, things like, you know, lidocaine, tree oil, aloe, other sort of like cold remedy, you know, remedies to make the burn feel better. Those are all aimed at the nerves and making the nerves less responsive, which doesn't necessarily make anything healthier that's injured. Okay, so you may feel, if you cover your arm with lidocaine and it's burned, you will have some, it won't fix everything, but your pain may go down. Doesn't mean that your burn is getting any better. And if anything, if it keeps you from getting the burn taken care of, it's not helpful. And lidocaine will not last for very long. It's not a long-term plan. So if to get to the point, if I had to stock my kitchen in a restaurant with a first aid kit, I would just have gauze and maybe some Vaseline, and really any clean towel or sheet. And this may sound crazy, but you know, I'm one of the more sophisticated burn centers in the country, and I'm telling you, it is fine to come in with a clean, and I stress the word clean, towel over the burn, and not try to cover it and doctor it up and treat it too much before you seek care. So, and then the next part I'll get to, and then we can get to some more questions. I'm probably not going to go the full hour here, but I kind of want to give you a sense of what the Loyola Burn Center is and what a burn center is. So first up, I have on there an email you can get us through. Deb Owen is our engagement sort of liaison to the world. You can call us anytime. I will say, if somebody is acutely hurt and injured, call 911. You can call the burn center and look it up. We will tell you to call 911. But seeking care at with any doctor is sort of the first step. And if you want to set up an appointment with us, if it's something that's not too bad, you could call and ask. What is it that we have here that we offer if you do get burned? Well, for one thing is that we just see so many of these. We sort of figured out sort of really optimal ways to treat them. The most common we see from restaurants, it's a close, I don't know who wins this match, but the close sort of fight is between people spilling stuff on the customer spilling stuff on themselves, right? And that, by the way, is a huge cause of burns at home. Usually, with children grabbing stuff. restaurants too, somebody gets hot tea, someone gets hot coffee, and they spill it on themselves, and you'd be surprised how bad of a burn you can get. Usually they do okay. Usually they don't need surgery if they're really young and like a baby, or if they're really elderly and they have thin, those are two populations that have really thin skin. Or if it's uniquely hot and they kind of freak out and don't take off the hot shirt, and it sits there on them for like 15 minutes, sort of cooling off over a period of 15 minutes rather than cooling underwater, those can become real burns. In the staff, I think the number one cause we see for sure is going to be grease burns. All right. People get burned by water too. The good news about water, sort of the saving grace, is that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and then it stops getting hotter, right? Then it turns to gas. So if you spill boiling water on yourself, you're spilling something that's 100 degrees Celsius. Is that good for you? No. Will that burn you? Yeah. But usually if you rinse it off quickly, and let me, I'll say it will not burn you in a way that will be as likely to be permanently scarring unless it's over a huge surface area, or you really can't get to it and cool it off. But grease is the exact opposite. Grease gets much hotter than water. It doesn't boil. That's why, not until it's way hotter. And it also sticks to your skin. So when you spill grease on yourself, you basically have this heating patch on your skin that sticks to it and gets in the way of other stuff. So those are the things we see. And now, if you obviously aren't going to put water on a grease fire, but I've never had somebody have a problem from putting water on a grease burn. It's not, the ratio of water to grease is so high that you're not going to have that like half and half mixing with. Yes, the first response for a fire that's a grease fire is not to pour water on it. I understand that, and I'm not saying you do. I'm sure everybody on this call knows that. But don't confuse that with, I can't put my hand under the water because there's grease on it. No, cool your hand off. So ways to prevent burn scars and optimizing the healing process. This is what I study and practice and try to improve every day. And it's the billion-dollar question, and I have some of the answers and nobody has all of them. So the number one thing, this is a little cheesy and dumb, but it's 100% true. The number one thing to prevent a burn scar is to prevent a burn. I just have to say it because, people don't think about these things until after the burn has happened. And if you can prevent the burn scar, that's great. If you do get burned, how do you prevent a burn scar? Decreasing the severity of the burn. And there's only one way that I know to do that, and that is to cool it off. All right. And then get it treated properly. So here's some of the interesting sort of science and medical research on it. And this is going back a long time. They've done these studies and they sort of repeated them, which is one thing that we sort of always debate in burn surgery is, when is it the time to go to surgery versus when should we let the burn heal? Why don't we just wait to see if it heals always? And if it doesn't heal, then do the surgery. And you can do that. And I will often offer that to patients who say, I don't want surgery no matter what. And I'll say, okay. And I'll explain to them that you can do that, but that might probably will increase the scarring you get. All right. So if a burn is optimized that it heals in less than 20 days, it will have a less thick and softer and less noticeable scar and less functionally significant scar than a burn that heals that you do op surgery on. Burns that take more than 3 weeks to heal will typically give you a scar that is worse than you would have gotten with surgery. It's not a 100% rule, but it's a pretty good one. And what does that mean? It means if it's a deep burn, you want to get it to surgery sooner to decrease the scarring. And if it's sort of in between and you don't know yet, you want to give it all the support and care to not further injure it, to support it and not stress it so that it can heal as quickly as possible before it starts scarring up, right? That means if you work in a kitchen, you shouldn't be working in a kitchen, unless it's a cool kitchen, which I've never seen before, for a little bit until that burn is healed, right? It means, you got to stay hydrated. This is usually why people are, why people are out of work for a little bit after they get burned. It's not because they can't move and do anything, although sometimes they can, but it's also because, oh, I have this burn, by the way, can I go back into the kitchen and go turn the stove on? And until that's sort of healed, you don't want to re-challenge it. In terms of preventing scars, sort of addition to healing, the only thing that I'll say actually has an impact is probably silicone patches, which you can buy. They're not cheap, and you put them over and they can sort of push the scar down a little bit. But I really, as someone who treats these all the time, I've seen every ointment that anybody's ever tried to sell, and none of them really changes the scar. Some scars get better over time, but there is a sort of a topical treatment that really does that. I guess there is kind of a related thing you can do, which is that you do want to use the things that are burned, right? You want to keep mobilizing them, because if you keep them stiff and not using them, if you think it's sort of helping them, you can sort of lose mobility from that. But really the best way to optimize the healing process, if you have a burn that's big enough or deep enough to make a scar, what you really need is to sort of, and you don't need to rush to the emergency room right away. And I'll address that in a second, but call and ask your primary care doctor if, can they see it? Call the burn center and ask if you can set up a clinic appointment. Or just see some doctor, talk to some doctor and decide, yeah, maybe this should be treated. And then there's nothing you can buy over the counter that's going to be equal to that, which leads to the next thing that's just come up. How do you differentiate between burns treated at home versus professional and medical care? That's the question I'm most scared of, to be honest with you, because I don't want to give you advice and have you and certainly may be misunderstood and have someone stay at home because I told them that, oh, this is fine to stay home. It's actually really hard to talk about that in general sense because everything is so different. But the bottom line is I guess there's a few things that I would say. If in doubt, ask somebody who knows more. That's a pretty easy one, and it's true for most things, and it's certainly true for this. The other thing is, if the pain is so bad, and this is kind of one of the things that we get, if the pain is so bad you can't control it, probably worth seeing somebody for that anyways. Go to an ED, they'll give you some pain pills. I am not pushing narcotics out like water. We try to get people off them as quick as they can. But I tell you, if you have a deep a partial second degree burn to all 5 of your fingers, it's not a happy day, and probably worth getting looked at. And the sort of pain, listen to the pain. Here's the opposite part of that. If it doesn't hurt at all, but it looks like it's really burned, like the skin is turned white, the skin all looks different, but it doesn't hurt, that's not good. What that usually means is that the nerves at the deepest layer of the skin are injured and they're not reporting pain. And that means that you're at risk of losing the full thickness of your skin. So things that, if you can't control the pain, that's just a natural reason to get help. Things that sort of don't feel right, if they're tight, if you can't move anything, those are all reasons to go. And then if something is bigger than you can sort of take care of with your own hand, if you can't dress it with your own hand, you probably need somebody else taking a look at it. It doesn't mean that, that if you can, then you don't need help, but certainly if it's bigger than the palm of your hand, it's worth a phone call at least to a doctor and to an urgent care. One thing that we aim to do, and we would be happy to work with people in this, is setting up sort of easy ways of access for work injuries. You don't need to come and see it. In fact, most of the calls we get from outside emergency rooms. And this is what I mean when I talk about the burn center being a resource to the community. Doctors, it used to be that burns were really common all over the world, including in the States. They're still very common in most countries in the world. And the reason they're less common now is because of safety. All of those rules and regulations and all that technology, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but in this case it works. So people do not get burned as frequently or as severely as they used to. In fact, one of the places I trained at used to fly in most of our patients from Mexico because their burns were so much worse there. There was such a need. The point being that burns that actually need care are not that they're not as common as you think once they get beyond a certain point. And so what will happen is, rather than send everybody in the world to the burn center, and we're happy to see you guys, but we would be flooded if every person who burned themselves in the kitchen on a given day showed up, obviously. If you go to an ED, you can ask them to call us. They often do. We're the most contacted ED burn center in the state. We're the biggest one in the state. We're the ones that most people call. And they'll call us and they'll take a picture and they'll say, hey, does this need something? And we'll say, you know what, and look, I love the hospital. I work at it all the time. I'm not looking to bring you into the hospital and sit you in the ED for 8 hours or to admit you to a hospital bed for 2 days if someone doesn't need it. If it looks like it's something that we can say, put some cream on it and the doctor prescribe that and we'll see you in a day or two in clinic, then we'll set that up. So a quick stop at the urgent care as opposed to, it is probably worth it. Or call your primary care physician. And the other thing, I guess, the other sign why you should come to, seek burn care, if it's not healing, well, then you better do something about that. All right. So reasons people come to see me, the burn is big and they think they have a burn, and they're usually right. I'd say over half of the people who show up in ED, the vast majority should go home. They go home with a little bit more clean burn and better care plan, and sort of a better plan for monitoring, intervening, and scarring than they would if they hadn't. A very small portion of them have bigger needs that stay, and the earlier they get to me, the better. So you don't need to rush to the burn center. As wonderful as I think we are, EDs are great, urgent care docs are great. We are here as a resource to you and to them. I have to address another one because it comes to my favorite. Does yellow mustard good for burns? Nope, it's really bad for burns. Sorry. Mustard is a notable toxin that's caustic. That's why it tastes spicy. You don't have taste buds on your skin, but it is caustic. So it may have been good. And when I say, all of grandma's sort of recipes, these things showed up for a reason. So in the absence of medical care, is mustard probably more likely to fight off bacteria than, say, nothing? Yeah, probably. But is it as good for a burn as, say, Vaseline? No. If you are, I have yet to see the homemade remedy that sort of does an improvement over what we offer topically. The over-the-counter stuff that's most common is bacitracin. That works for most stuff. The drug that you do need a prescription for that you'll usually get from ED is called Silvadene. Why that one needs a prescription and bacitracin doesn't, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. It's just the way the FDA worked it out 1,000 years ago. But it's a little helpful for deeper burns, and it creates a little bit of a layer of protection over time. That itself is sort of reason to get help. But no, I would not use mustard. The latest advances for burn treatment. So this is the stuff that I can get really geeky on, and I'm going to skip to one of the slides I kind of skipped over. So, I think about burns and how to treat them every day, and that's what I do all the time. And I have a whole talk on sort of the evolution of technology in burn care. But here's the sort of the summary, right? And the summary is that like the past 10 to 20 years have seen like a huge explosion in sort of what we can do for burns. It's really exciting. One of them that's been around now for not quite 10 years, and I was involved not in developing this, I don't get a dime from it, but one of the early adopters, and it's nationally become standard of care, is called, the brand name is RECELL, but what was called is autologous skin cell suspension. So what you see there, if you're looking at this picture I pulled up, in the left-hand lower quadrant is a piece of skin. So when we do a skin graft, I mentioned before, we slice a piece of skin off superficial enough that it can heal, and we stretch it out and tack it on. Rather than just take the skin and cover the burn, if it's not as deep, and it doesn't work for all burns, but burns that are pretty deep, too deep to heal maybe, but not so deep, and that's where you get to sort of in the weeds and doctor stuff. You take this little piece of skin, you put it in a certain chemical solution, and then you basically disaggregate it, or you dissolve it essentially. I mean, not is the best way I can describe it. You dissolve the skin into this trypsin-based solution. And so suddenly you have all these skin cells, and you take and you see that picture of that syringe squirting. You take them, you put them in basically sort of a fancy kind of saline that's sort of really nurturing, and you spray those skin cells over the burned area. And doing that has sort of changed a lot for us. It's really taken off. Surgeons like myself use it for a couple of things. It's helpful for making things heal faster and sort of giving them a better chance of healing without scar that are sort of on the margins. That's one use for it. It also is something that we use. So when we take skin graft now, we can sort of use much less skin graft and mesh it and stretch it and just use pieces of it here and there. And this spray will sort of cover in between. And it actually does so, not right away, but it actually does so in a way that's a little bit smoother. And I in my experience, that's sort of much smoother than traditional skin graft because it sort of heals in quickly and reliably and naturally. There's a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to check myself to make sure I don't go on talking forever on this. But one thing that's just come on the market that I was involved in the trials to approve, which so I got to use it before it was on the market, is an aggressive immediate enzymatic debrider. It's actually this is funny. The chefs in the audience will know it's pineapple based. It's called bromelain, which is the thing in pineapple. If you ever put steak in pineapple, when you guys are, if anybody knows this is going to be the people on this call, you know how it sort of renders the meat. So that chemical will actually degrade a non-living burn scar. And what we do is you come in, we numb you up if it's appropriate for you, and there's different reasons. And rather than having to cut away that sort of barbaric way I talked about before, and the problem with cutting is knives only, they cut a slice. This just cuts away or eats away the stuff that is burned, and everything that's alive is left behind. And with that, we can save more living tissue and then avoid the need to graft and have better results. And that's really good. I can go on to some other technologies, but something came up here, which is chemical burn. Flushing with cold water still needed. Cool preferable over warm. So flushing is like as much as rinsing. Sorry, guys. I have to cover the frequency, so I can't ignore my phone. Chemical burns. Rinsing is critical in chemical burns. And the reason is just like rinsing cools things off, rinsing dilutes a chemical and gets rid of it. And one of the things that makes chemical burns so nasty, and they can get kind of nasty. I mean, they're usually not that bad, but they can get pretty nasty. And it's because, you think you got rid of it, but if it's a really potent chemical and it's really concentrated, it's still in there somewhere, right? So the policy that we have at the burn center and sort of standard of practice, if you come to an ED, is that you should stay under running irrigation, which is basically a hose, in a controlled and warmed fashion, in the area of the burn for 30 minutes, right? Because dilution is, if you don't dilute and rinse away all of that chemical, your burn's getting worse. In terms of cool versus warm, I mean, that's not as critical there because heat's not a big factor. The one thing is, if it's a big burn, then we make sure that it's somewhat warm because we don't want to cool. If you have someone with a big burn and you try to soak them with cold water, that doesn't go well. They get cold very fast. If you have a burn big enough to cause that problem, you should most definitely be in an emergency room, probably through an ambulance. And I will say this, that the best results we get in chemical burns are from people who get burned in factories. And it's not rocket science. It's because factories know this and they have showers. And sad to say, but I am more confident if you tell me somebody came from a factory, they are more likely to have a full effective irrigation and rinse before coming to see me than if someone came from an ED. They know how important rinsing is. It is so important unless the person is sort of acutely not breathing or their heart is stopping or something terrible. It is like worth staying there to rinse them before you take them into the car. And that's like the only time that's true is for chemical burns. I will say most of the chemical burns that I get from restaurants, I do get a couple, but usually it's really just a burn and there's a chemical in it, which doesn't make it any better. But the kind of burns that by themselves make chemicals that by themselves makes burns aren't too often used in cooking, but I'm sure some of you have a way to use it that I haven't. I'm sure there are some risks out there. And yeah, if anything you do in chemical burns is fluid. So what else can I tell you about? We're at 45 minutes. We were going to do a question and answer before, but I kind of wanted to integrate it because I was kind of more curious about what you guys had to ask than I was about what I had to say. What else can I address? I don't know. Ellie, any questions that you could think people would want to know about?
Well, I know you spoke a little bit, this is just from my own curiosity. You spoke a little bit about grease burns and you said there's not any danger to like running them under cold water. But is that, I guess I'm seeing burns kind of differently when it's like a hot surface versus grease because it kind of stays there. Is it enough to like if to get it off with just the water, or do you need like if let's say if the grease is stuck, and should you rub it at all or just leave it be before you go to the
That's
hospital?
a good question. So unlike a chemical burn, so we were just talking about how sorry, my screen's being a little funny. We were talking about how chemical burns sort of keep burning you. It's not the grease itself that burns you, it's the heat. Okay. So you don't need to get the grease off. You need to cool the grease. So you're right that the water is not the best way to get that grease off of that finger. But if that grease is, 39 degrees Celsius, you're fine, right? And look, the thing is, this is kind of why it's so important. It's so easy to fix. It doesn't take a long time under cool water to cool that grease, right? I mean, patients with really terrible burns can be hot for a long time, but a stream of cool water for a few minutes will cool most burns down to an appropriate temperature. And then getting the grease off is like another problem. And quite honestly, like if the grease is stuck on it and it's burned, you're going to find out really quickly how bad the burn is when you try to get the grease off. And if your skin comes with it, then you probably need to get some help.
Someone in the chat just mentioned steam burns are awful. Is that the same treatment as other
Yeah, so
types?
steam burns are terrible. Usually, well, not always, but when they're really bad is when they're in a contained environment. So you have that heat all over you, and it is at the full 100 degrees or a little bit more because the gas heats past 100. And that does cause a real problem. And the other thing is that people breathe, and so they get injuries to their mouth. And almost always when I see a steam burn, I see it in combination. The steam burns the person then drops the source of the steam, and then they have a scald burn on top of the steam burn. And yeah, those are rough. Treat them the same as anything else. One thing I meant to mention in terms of, we talked a lot about what happens in the kitchen, but the customer stuff I think is important. They're people too. But you really can, I see these things handled a lot, and I think a lot of times, understandably, restaurants will sort of want to step away and not get involved because they don't want to. And I get that, but just giving somebody a cool glass of water to pour on their burn can help them. And then, quite honestly, if someone comes and says, "Well, I got burned at your restaurant," well, the first thing they'll say is, "Was the soup too hot?" And I can tell you, as the one who gets who gets these calls from lawyers, like I tell them, I can't tell you how hot the water was that burned this person because I don't know how long it was on them, and it's too complicated to figure out. So there isn't a magic number that I can tell you is the right number. But if they say, "Yeah, but the person didn't cool it off," then I can say, but it would have been better had they done that. So that's the one thing you can do that could actually improve the outcome, and is doing everything you can for the patient, which is the best thing in a world with or without lawyers, it's the best thing to do, is to just cool that burn off. Other things, I'm always curious. I have all my questions for you, but I see a lot of people work in kitchens, and I write them a lot of notes about getting off of work. It's an interesting thing about being a doctor. I don't want to do it and make your lives miserable, so I try to limit it to when they really can't. But you know, dealing with reintegrating into work can be an interesting thing. Some people have real PTSD. It's hard to predict, and it's not even from the big terrible burns always. But some people will have a really hard time getting back into work, and what's going on is that they're really scared and they don't even realize it. Some people will try to, I see a lot of things go south when chefs are kind of like surgeons to my kind of, I don't know a ton of them, but we have that kind of stubborn, we'll do whatever we can do. We'll get it done. You know, that seems to me to be a kind of chef thing. I don't know if it's how universal is, but get it done, right? And I've seen a lot of chefs put their fingers back into gloves with burns, and I'll give you a hint, the burn doesn't get better. So, and then, you know, everyone loses, right? Except for the lawyer, but everyone loses because then the guy's fingers hurt more, then the guy can't work for longer. So if you have an employee who is trying to work through it, and look, culturally, there's some employees, you know, that's a worker is supposed to keep working, and they need the permission of their, you know, their manager to say, no, you're injured, you can stop. That's in everyone's best interest. And we are not looking to write people on 5-month vacations for their burn. Usually they can get them healed and back to work pretty quick.
I have another question. If you have a burn that is already healed, but is still causing, like you said, like the scarring pain, is there things you can do for that?
Yeah, that's something that you would, if you're having, I mean, the answer is there's something I can do for that. There's very little that can be done
Yes,
by
yes,
else.
physicians.
So, I mean, in terms of home treatments, there are some massages that we can teach you to do. But it's kind of probably one of the more underutilized things we have. The scar management is in the burn center. Burn surgeons are kind of the people who do the most scar work, us and general plastic surgeons. And because of that, we end up dealing with people with burns because they have the biggest scars. There's a lot of people out there with scars that bother them that have no idea there's something to be done about it. It's very important when scarring is a complicated thing, and the aesthetics are a huge part of it in terms of, you know, not just, oh, I don't look pretty, but if a person sees their body change, it can be very disruptive and they can want to get their body back to normal. So one of the things I always tell a patient who comes with a scar is I can't make you unscarred, and that's important to understand. But there are things you can do to help them. One person said aloe on scars. Well, the aloe part, aloe's fine. It's the moisturizing. So one of the reasons scars get problems is because they don't have the sweat glands that we have if they're deep enough, and therefore they don't maintain the right moisture. And so they're kind of constantly dry. So we have our patients put on like moisturizing lotion once their burns are healed, like many times a day. And they need it. Otherwise they get dry and cracked. The things that I find the most helpful for patients, where patients sort of have benefited the most, and it's kind of fun for me because they didn't initially, now we get to help them, is if you have and it's hard to predict, but if you have a scar from a burn, it can cause this really uncomfortable, like terrible itching, which sounds like big deal, it's itching, but it can drive people nuts. If you think of like the worst itch you've had, and it not, you know, coming every day over and over again, it can drive people nuts. We're pretty sure it has to do with the way the burn basically tugs on the fibers that convey itch. And the same thing will happen with, sometimes it's itching, sometimes it's like a really kind of weird electric like pain. Not like when they got burn pain, but like it feels like they'll often talk like someone's got a knife under my skin or something like that. If you're having symptomatic scars, I would definitely, we definitely can help with those. 100% of the time, no, but certainly worth trying. And it's no longer, like I said, it's no longer like, oh, well, either you get surgery or sorry. It's, we have stuff short of surgery that helps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any kind of final thoughts? I know we've been doing the Q&A throughout, which is super helpful, but I guess if you just have any final, you know, you've given a lot of insight. I guess this is your main takeaway, cool the burn, put out the fire, cool the burn.
So I always get sort of taught, like if you give a talk, I want to make sure everybody who leaves this talk remembers cool the burn with water. So I'm sorry if I'm obsessive, but the fact that you know that off the hook means that we got that accomplished, I think. I think the other thing is to know, is really to know that the what a burn center is. And I really do. I mean, look, I'm a surgeon. I operate. That's a big part of my job. But I also run a burn center, and that's about like taking care of burns and preventing burns and helping burns in my region. And a lot of those people that come into Me Hurt come from restaurants. I would if there's any way that you would like more information on burns, if you are trying something to prevent burns, if you'd like to talk to me about your safety plan, anything. If you have a worker who, is having trouble because, we're here to help the community, and the restaurant industry is probably the community with like a lot of needs. It's concentrated in it, right? And that's as old as Prometheus, right? Ever since we learned to cook, we've been getting burned. And God bless you, because I love all the restaurants in Chicago. So we're not going to stop. And so anything I can do, I will say I have one guilty pleasure about when I get a chef, which is that usually someone brings me food and everyone gets happy. All right. So thank you guys for all you do. Please know I really mean it when I say we are a resource for you to engage however you feel fit. If you're having trouble getting someone taken care of, we are working on call us and we'll get I'm not going to tell you over the phone what to do for the burn, and it's okay, come to the hospital. That's a little bit hard for me to do over the phone. But if you say, I got this guy and he needs to see a burn doctor and he can't get an appointment, go to the burn center directly. Loyola is great, but we are here to get through any roadblocks, and we're here as an access point for you.
Great, great. Then I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. It's
Thank you.
super helpful. I'd also like to thank the Cook County Small Business Source for their continued support. And then after this webinar, everyone will receive an email with links to the webinar recording and presentation, and we can share your information as well in case they want to get in contact. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Dr. Carson, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks so much.